Nikki Haley and Larry Kudlow are in the middle of a catfight. There's a lot of drama. It's like a soap opera, but in government, and it has everything to do with sanctions against Russia. Now, earlier this week, there was a lot of talk about the Trump administration finally imposing and enforcing sanctions against Russia because of their involvement in this whole mess in Syria. And so people who think that all of these Russia investigations are much to do about nothing, were like, see, he's gonna do these sanctions, see, what do you have to say about that now? Turns out, no, he is not planning on enforcing these sanctions, and he didn't even communicate that with Nikki Haley, who is the US ambassador to the United Nations. Now, it all started when Nikki Haley went on television and said this.
Are there any consequences for Assad's patrons, Russia and Iran, who continue to protect him?
Absolutely. So you will see that Russian sanctions will be coming down. Secretary Mnuchin will be announcing those on Monday if he hasn't already. And they will go directly to any sort of companies that were dealing with equipment related to Assad and chemical weapons use. And so I think everyone is going to feel it at this point. I think everyone knows that we sent a strong message, and our hope is that they listen to it.
Wrong. That is not what's going to happen. I mean, no one communicated with her that that's not what's going to happen. But Larry Kudlow, who is Trump's economic advisor, responded to what Nikki Haley had to say on television, and here is what his response was.
Ahead of the curve, she's done a great job. She's a very effective ambassador. There might have been some momentary confusion about that. But if you talk to Steve Mnuchin at Treasury and so forth, he will tell you the same thing. They're in charge of this. We have had sanctions. Additional sanctions are under consideration.
So Haley gets super salty about those comments and responds back with, quote, "With all due respect, I do not get confused."
Wow. Okay, good for her. Never gets confused. Sometimes I get confused on the road. Which road should I take?
Confusion is a normal part of life, but it's okay. I like that response. It was strong.
It was strong. That's about the only thing I like about Nikki Haley.
Agreed.
All right, so I am gonna break this down into 3 parts. One is the drama, or drams, as we like to call it. There's a short-term drama of this catfight back and forth. There's a long-term drama of Nikki Haley maybe coming from behind with a 2x4 against Donald Trump.
Okay, let's
We'll get to that.
Yeah,
we'll get to it.
Don't get ahead of yourself.
Okay. Okay. But the second part is the instability of the Trump administration and the messages we're sending to the world. And the third part is policy, where I am more on Donald Trump's side than I am on Nikki Haley's side. Whoa, what is this? First, I have to note my amusement at her going on TV and saying, "We are sending a strong message to Russia." Turns out, no, we're sending a really, really weak message to Russia, which is okay, because again, I don't need to antagonize Russia more, but I would have skipped the flip-flopping part, because that really seems fairly pathetic. And then she said, this is gonna show that we meant business. No, since you said it and had to take it back, it actually shows the exact opposite. We do not mean business. And finally she said that Russia will be feeling the pain. No, it turns out you're feeling the pain, not Russia. And so that gets to point number 1, which is Donald Trump, apparently watching this on TV, grew very angry and started yelling at the TV and then anyone else who was nearby. That's according to New York Times reporting, and they have sources inside the White House. So, clown of all clowns, do you want to figure out what your policy is and effectively communicate that to all the people in your administration, especially before they go on TV? So on the issue of whose fault is the miscommunication, that is extremely clear. Of course, Donald Trump's fault. Nikki Haley is a professional, and in this issue, I agree with you, Anna, that she was not confused. It was Trump who was confused, as usual, but it's a larger issue than that, because there's a lot of people inside the Trump administration who want to push a much more aggressive stance towards Russia. And they keep pushing and pushing and pushing in that direction. So every once in a while, Nikki Haley or someone else will go out and go, "We're gonna show Russia." And then Trump's like, "Hey, you idiots, did you not get the memo that I'm compromised? I don't want to do something strong against Russia.
Yeah.
I owe them, or whatever it is, tapes, money laundering, whatever it is. But no, we are not going to do anything strong on Russia. When is it going to get you through your thick head that I am corrupt?"
I'm dying to chime in. I have so many things to chime in on. So first of all, I want to mention this caveat before I get into my commentary, because Nikki Haley's foreign policy is not something that I'm supportive of. She's incredibly hawkish. She is in favor of, doing these sanctions because look, she believes in the sanctions, but she always wants to take a much more aggressive approach than we need to when it comes to foreign policy. So overall, I don't necessarily agree with her. However, when it comes to how this all unfolded publicly, she is not in the wrong. She was not advised that they had decided to switch gears. And I'll give you some statements from actual White House officials that spoke to the New York Times. According to several officials, the White House did not inform Ms. Haley that it had changed course on sanctions, leaving her to hang out alone. And so this keeps happening over and over again in the Trump administration. And standard protocol is, well, the person who wasn't informed and unfortunately made these statements publicly should now be smeared or should be criticized or should be put down in some way. And so that's when Kudlow gets involved and says she must have gotten confused, I'm paraphrasing. And I love that she wasn't gonna have it. She's like, no, I'm not gonna follow protocol. I don't get confused. Here's what really happened. And so I appreciate the way that she handled that, even if overall, when it comes to foreign policy, I don't necessarily agree with her. Now, with that said, Cenk alluded to Trump's reaction after watching Haley on television and what she had to say about these sanctions. And the Times is reporting that this happened. Trump saw Haley on television sharply criticizing Russia over its intervention in Ukraine. Who wrote that for her? Trump yelled angrily at the screen, and apparently he repeated again, who wrote that for her?
So let me be clear. These are two different instances, same reaction in both instances. When she's on Face the Nation and talking about Russia over the weekend, he gets angry and yells at the TV. Earlier in the administration, when she had gone and criticized Russia about their intervention in Ukraine, same exact reaction, super angry, yelling at the screen, etc. That goes to the point I was making earlier. People who work for Trump, when are you gonna realize he doesn't wanna do anything about Russia? And for some on the right and the left who think, no, Trump has deeply held principles and a governing philosophy. Anyway, you think that, God bless your heart. Okay, then he has a governing philosophy that we should be at peace with Russia and sanctions and bombing and all these different things are going to upset that governing philosophy, or he's compromised. But either way, it's clear that he feels very, very strongly that we should be soft on Russia. And by the way, again, on policy, I'm about to agree with him on some parts. So, but no, the military industrial complex, the neoconservatives, here, I'll get to my agreement right now. Nikki Haley's a neocon. And as Ro Khanna pointed out, she's a parrot of Lindsey Graham and John McCain, and as her job is to drive us into war. So no, I vote no. I'm totally against that. No matter why Trump wants to be very, very friendly to Russia, I don't want him to be very friendly to Russia. I believe some of the sanctions might make sense, but in terms of the bombing or driving us more into military conflict in Syria, no way. I'm with Trump on that. That no, we should tap the brakes and we should not just bulldoze into war as the neocons like Nikki Haley want. So on the miscommunication, the clownishness, all of that, Trump is wrong. On the policy, Nikki Haley is way more wrong.
Yes, overall I agree with that assessment. However, I do love just the way she's handling herself in the position that she's in. Because remember, Trump is surrounded by yes men, right? I think of Jeff Sessions and how incredibly humiliated he became after Trump has criticized him time and time again on social media. And he's like, oh, I'll do anything for you, Trump, just please like me. So he's surrounded by these yes men. And then you have this woman, Nikki Haley, who's like, I'm gonna push back. Now, I'll give you an example. The New York Times reported that Trump has grown exasperated by her outspokenness. He doesn't like it.
Oh yeah, that's shocking.
You don't like that. Oh, is it bothering you? Okay, and then another thing, there are whispers, rumors within the White House involving Mike Pence and Nikki Haley and how they might join forces to challenge Trump in 2020. Oh, I hate both of them. I hate both of them. But I love that drama. It's so good. It's so good.
Hey, to Haley. So earlier on, there were reports that Nikki Haley and Donald Trump were getting along famously. I never believed those reports. Because Nikki Haley was not in the Trump camp to begin with during the primaries. She is way more establishment than Donald Trump, and she has high ambitions. None of these are going to be a good match for Donald Trump. So I was just waiting for this to blow up, and now it has. So when Trump hears her being tough against Vladimir Putin, he's like, well, you don't know what I know, shut up, right? Point 1 point. Then he hears, wait, let me get this right. Rumors of Pence and Haley, not in 2024, in 2020 when I would be running for re-election. Oh, no, she didn't. So here comes orange-faced, fuming volcano Trump.
Yep.
So now the clock has begun on Nikki Haley's tenure at the Trump administration. Tick, 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 tick. She could be gone in the Nikki of time.
You're the worst.
Agreed.
Let's just pretend like that didn't happen.
Wish I interrupted you sooner. Maybe I'm
not
missing
alone.
something because we're talking sanctions. I don't think she's talking about. Okay, so the policy now being because of what happened with whatever chemical attack happened in Syria, we're going to launch more bombs, and then Trump is against that because obviously he's for that. He did it. I mean, of course, it's just a cursory thing to make it look like he's a tough guy when I'm not really sure what that all happened, but. We're talking about sanctions that Trump isn't, I thought, sanctions that Trump isn't implementing from the beginning, things that Congress already voted on, bipartisan way voted on to implement on Russia based off things they've been doing in general from beginning to end. So that's what he disagrees with her on, and I'm not sure if we
Yes.
agree with that. I mean, you guys can.
No,
I'm
no,
talking
no,
about,
no.
I don't agree with him on allowing that stuff to just slide.
No, so JR makes a great point, and thank you because I need to clarify about that. I am against Nikki Haley's generally hawkish views and neocon views and her calls for more bombing, et cetera, right? But on this specific issue, that clarification is so important because this was about sanctions going towards oligarchs who had business dealings with Syria's chemical weapons program. Now that should be fairly unobjectionable, even for guys like me who don't want any escalation with Syria or Russia. So number one, on that particular issue, you're right, JR, I'm on Haley rather than Trump's side. Macro issues where she wants to keep pushing more towards conflict, I'm against her and more with Trump. But more important than that is why Trump blows up over this,
Yes.
but not the bombing.
Yes.
Okay, why? Because this touches Russian financial interests. And so that actually hurts the oligarchs who he is in bed with. And so that's why he can't have it. The bombing, some people die, whatever. A lot of people are dying in Syria. As long as you don't hit the Russians, I think we're gonna be okay, and that makes me look tough. But if my friends in Russia have their bank accounts frozen, they are not going to be happy about that. That's why he flipped out over this.
Right, and so there's also one other comment I want to quickly make, and it's about, just the optics of everything that's going on right now. I mean, you say you agree a little more with Trump's strategy or foreign policy. But remember, the biggest issue here is that Trump doesn't have a strategy or a foreign policy. And so, the international, to other countries, right, to our allies, to other players, they look at what's going on right now, and how is anyone gonna take the White House at its word? How is anyone going to expect any type of stability when you have a president who doesn't even know what he's doing? He changes his mind day to day, especially on big issues like Syria. I mean, 2 Fridays ago, we're doing a story about how he wants to pull out as soon as possible, take the troops out as soon as possible. And the following Friday, he's dropping bombs and he's getting more involved. And so he's just kind of doing this day by day and changing his mind. And while Nikki Haley is making statements that the White House has already reneged on, think about how that looks to other countries.
So that's a great point. One last point of clarification. You're absolutely right. Trump does not have a strategy. He does not have a policy. He doesn't have a policy on anything. So I agree with the result of his instinct of, for whatever reason, I don't want to get mired in Syria. That's what I agree with. I don't want to push into Syria, and I don't want to push towards more war. Now, having said that, the mixed messages we're sending to the rest of the world is insanity, because they're just sitting back going, wait, how do I react?
Right.
Because first of all, whenever any Trump administration official says something, I have to wait. I have to wait until Trump tweets about it. Is it true or not true? Because this guy's a total freaking clown. So he doesn't even communicate to his own UN ambassador. He had to tell Rex Tillerson to stop negotiations with North Korea, which he then later restarted and bragged about after firing Rex Tillerson. So nobody has any idea what the hell's going on because Trump doesn't have any idea what's going on. To Anna's point, not only is he changing the stance that his officials are saying, he often changes his own stance.
That's right.
So the whole world is just waiting, like at the edge of their seat, like what in the world's going to happen next?
Exactly.